Most people think their money problem is that they do not make enough. Sometimes that is true. Very often it is only half true. The deeper problem is that they do not have a system. They have stress, they have bills, they have habits, they have guilt. They have little bursts of motivation followed by long stretches of avoidance. They have a rough feeling that they should be doing better, saving more, spending less, investing sooner, paying things off faster, but they do not have a structure strong enough to hold those intentions in place once real life starts pressing on them again. That is why money feels so heavy for so many decent people. It is not always because they are lazy. It is not always because they are foolish. It is not always because they are mathematically incapable. It is often because they are trying to manage a complicated financial life through emotion instead of through a design. And emotion is a terrible accountant. I know this because I have watched generations of people live inside the same pattern. Good people, hard-working people, people with talent, discipline, and decent instincts in many parts of life. They get up, go to work, care for their families, pay what they can, and try to keep the whole thing moving. Yet money still feels like a fog. They are never fully certain what is happening. They know they should look at the numbers, but they do not. They know there is leakage somewhere, but they cannot quite locate it. They sense that the anxiety is costing them, but the anxiety itself makes it harder to confront the facts that might relieve it. That is one of the cruel little loops of personal finance. When you most need clarity, shame makes you hide from it. And once you hide from it long enough, the numbers stop being numbers. They become a source of dread. I do not like dread. Dread is expensive. It is expensive in money, in marriages, in sleep, in self-respect, and in all the little decisions that become weaker when the mind is operating under a constant, low-grade fear of what it might discover if it looked too carefully. That is why I believe the best financial advice most people will ever receive is not really about some extraordinary investment or some brilliant tax move or some secret stock or clever loophole. It is much more basic. It is about building a money system so simple and so strong that it keeps working even when your emotions do not. That is the real breakthrough, not information. Architecture. Now, the source material in front of me brings together 4 respected money voices, and each of them is pointing at a different piece of the same machine. One talks about seeing where the money is going. One talks about putting every dollar into a few meaningful buckets. One talks about automation and small daily choices turning into serious long-term wealth. One talks about expectations and the dangerous habit of turning money into a scoreboard for your worth. I think they are all right. But I also think there is a deeper line running through all of it, and that line is this. You do not need a perfect financial life to start feeling better. You need a visible one. The moment your money stops being a mystery and starts becoming a system, you begin to recover power. That is the part people do not appreciate until they feel it for themselves. They think financial security begins when they hit some number. 10,000 in cash debt, free, $1 million invested, a house paid off, a certain salary. Those things can matter, of course they matter. But relief often begins much earlier than people realize. Relief begins the moment the chaos becomes legible, because chaos is expensive, and invisible chaos is the most expensive kind. That is why I would begin where most people least want to begin. I would begin by looking no fantasies, no affirmations, no motivational speeches about abundance. Look, what is coming in? What is going out? What gets paid every month, no matter what? What changes with usage? What is pure choice? What subscriptions have attached themselves to your life like barnacles? What recurring little expenses are draining cash? Not because they are evil, but because nobody has challenged them in months or years. What categories are truly necessities, and what categories have been emotionally upgraded into necessities? Because the modern world is very good at dressing wants in the costume of needs. This is the first great financial skill, not earning. Seeing people want to skip this because they think clarity will make them feel bad. It might at first, but ignorance is almost always more expensive than discomfort. I have seen people avoid their numbers for so long that even ordinary bills feel like threats. They do not open statements. They do not review accounts. They do not know what the subscriptions cost, what the utilities average, what groceries really run, what they are paying in quiet convenience fees, or which spending patterns are driven by exhaustion rather than preference. Then they tell themselves they are bad with money. That sentence annoys me, not because nobody ever makes mistakes, but because the phrase "I am bad with money" often becomes a hiding place. It sounds like self-awareness, but it frequently functions as surrender. It gives a person permission to stop developing a skill because they have already assigned failure to personality. I do not believe in that. Money is not magic. It is arithmetic attached to behavior. That does not mean it is always easy. It can be emotionally difficult. It can be shaped by childhood, by scarcity, by debt, by shame, by family patterns, by partners, by crises, by status pressure, by the sheer exhaustion of trying to live in a world where everything seems to be automatically billing you every time you breathe. But emotionally difficult and intellectually impossible are not the same thing. The system can be learned. That is the good news. And the first part of learning it is brutally plain. Write down where the money goes. I do not mean in vague moral categories. I mean in reality, housing, utilities, transportation, minimum debt payments, insurance, food, grooming, streaming services, childcare, phone, gym, coffee, delivery fees, shopping, gifts, eating out, everything. Do not start with judgment. Start with evidence. This is one reason I have always believed that a good money list is more powerful than a self-punishing budget. The word budget makes people think of restriction. It makes them think of no. It makes them think of guilt and the small humiliations of adult life. But a proper money list is really a visibility tool. It lets you say with some precision, here is the machine I am currently operating. Only once you can see the machine can you decide what to repair. Now, when you do that, one of two truths usually appears. Either you do not make enough or you spend too much. Sometimes both. But the distinction matters enormously because the cure is different. If almost all of your money is going to hard bills and usage, heavy necessities, then you may not have a discipline problem. You may have an income problem. That matters because no amount of cutting restaurants or buying cheaper shampoo will fix a structural mismatch between earnings and the non-negotiables of life. People in this situation often get the worst advice because they are told to become even more austere when in reality the real move may be to increase earnings, renegotiate housing, change jobs, share costs, or structurally rethink the largest fixed obligations. On the other hand, if a great deal of your money is going to the choice category, the things that feel small one by one but form a large river together, then yes, the issue may be that too much of life is being spent unconsciously. That is not a moral crime. It is simply expensive. I think this distinction is one of the most merciful things a person can learn about money because it replaces self-hatred with diagnosis. Diagnosis is useful. Self-hatred is not. Once diagnosis is clear, the next major step is structure. This is where I part company with the kind of personal finance that becomes a hobby in microscopic control. I do not want people spending their lives acting as part-time bookkeepers to smallness. I do not want them agonizing over every $5 decision while the larger financial architecture remains sloppy. I do not admire the person who can tell me exactly how much he spent on blueberries last month if he cannot tell me his savings rate, his fixed cost ratio, or what percentage of his take home actually reaches investments. That is not discipline. That is trivia. The real system is much simpler. There are 4 large buckets that matter: fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt, free spending. That is enough. You put your financial life into those 4 containers, and suddenly the whole thing becomes much easier to manage. Fixed costs are the things that keep life operating: rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, transportation, minimum debt payments. Savings are the shorter and medium term reserves, emergency money, sinking funds, the cash you may need in the next 1 to 5 years. Investments are the long-term engine, retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, the money you are not planning to touch because it is there to grow. And guilt-free spending is exactly what it sounds like. The category that allows a person to enjoy life without feeling as though every purchase is a betrayal of the future. This last category is vastly more important than people think. A financial system that contains no joy usually collapses. That is one of the greatest mistakes of self-serious personal finance. It often teaches people to live as though every pleasurable expense is evidence of weakness. That is nonsense. A life that contains no room for pleasure becomes emotionally unstable. Then the instability eventually produces overcorrection, splurging, avoidance, resentment, or the feeling that money is an enemy rather than a tool. I do not want people living like that. I want them living in a way where the important financial priorities are protected first, and the rest of life can still feel human. That is why guilt-free spending matters so much. It is not the enemy of wealth. It is part of a system that makes wealth building sustainable. Now, the percentages can vary based on stage of life and circumstance, but the deeper point remains. Once you know the 4 buckets, money stops being one giant threatening blob. It becomes a few measurable flows. And measured flows are easier to improve than atmospheric anxiety. That is the thing I wish more people understood. Control is often just compression. You take a huge messy problem and compress it into a few variables that actually matter. That is what this 4-bucket framework does. It compresses life into something you can work with. And once you can work with it, you can start making intelligent trade-offs. Maybe the fixed costs are too high. Maybe savings are non-existent. Because subscriptions and convenience spending have colonized the guilt-free bucket without permission. Maybe investments are being neglected because nobody automated them, and so they remain dependent on mood, leftover money, and whatever is not consumed by the weak small emergencies. Maybe the guilt-free category is secretly shame-free chaos rather than a deliberate pleasure budget. Fine, at least now you know, and knowing is the beginning of freedom. This is also why I care so much about automation. The modern economy is already automated against you. That is one of the central realities of financial life. Now, everyone wants to hook themselves into your future income. They do not want one transaction. They want a stream, a subscription, a recurring debit, a monthly extraction so small you stop noticing it and so permanent it becomes part of the weather. The streaming platform, the meal service, the app, the gym, the software, the skincare bundle, the delivery membership, the media package, the monthly box, the cloud storage, the convenience layer on top of the convenience layer. The modern economy is full of institutions trying to establish permanent little toll booths around your paycheck. That is not an accident. Recurring revenue is one of the most beautiful things in business. It is much less beautiful when you are on the paying side of 15 recurring streams you barely remember approving. This is why people feel financially thinner than the paycheck should allow. Their money is being routed automatically by dozens of decisions made months or years ago, many of which no longer reflect what they actually value. Now, so the antidote is not to reject automation. The antidote is to make automation work for you before it works against you. That is the crucial move. If the economy is going to automate extraction, you had better automate accumulation. Otherwise, the system wins by default. This is where I think David Bach's simplest insight remains so powerful. It is not the exact amount that changes lives. First, it is the fact of automatic movement. $10 a day, $20 a day, a roundup app, a small transfer into a savings account, a tiny recurring investment. In isolation, these amounts look almost laughable to people raised on social media fantasies of instant riches. But the point of the small move is not only the arithmetic. The point is that it changes identity. It proves to you that money can begin flowing toward you instead of only away from you. That is an enormous psychological shift. The first automatic transfer into savings is often worth more emotionally than its numerical size suggests, because it breaks the old pattern in which every dollar was either consumed immediately or absorbed by the automatic economy before you even had a chance to decide. I have always admired simple automatic systems because they do not ask you to become a daily hero. Heroism is unreliable. Systems are better. If the right transfers happen before you start negotiating with yourself, then you stop relying on discipline alone. You no longer have to win every tiny argument. The machine wins it for you. That is one reason wealthy people often seem less stressed about the mechanics of money. It is not always because they are morally superior or even especially disciplined. It is often because the machine around them is better organized. Payroll goes to the right places. Investment contributions happen without drama. The bills are managed, the accounts are visible. The review rhythm exists. The important moves are made before mood can interfere. This is what ordinary people need more of. Not more guilt, more machine. Now let me say something about saving that many people need to hear, especially those who feel behind. It is never too late to start. That sentence is so obvious, people often dismiss it. Do not dismiss it. I have watched too many people waste precious years because they believed they had already wasted too many years. That is one of the great traps of adulthood. A person looks at 40, 50, 60 and says, I should have begun at 25. Therefore, there is no point now. This is absurd. It is emotionally understandable, but financially absurd. $500,000 at 65 is not the same as having nothing. $200,000 at retirement is not the same as having nothing. $10,000 in savings is not the same as having nothing. $1,000 in emergency cash is not the same as having nothing. The money culture on the internet has a cruel habit of making anything short of extraordinary seem irrelevant. That is, poison security matters. Runway matters. A little breathing room matters. The first $100 matters. The first 1,000 matters. The first 10,000 matters. People who are already drowning in shame are not helped by being told that their efforts only count if they compound into millions. I reject that entirely. What matters first is not grandeur. It is direction. Are you moving toward more clarity, more savings, more structure, more ownership, more stability, and more peace than you had before? If yes, then the machine is beginning to work. That deserves respect. And because it deserves respect, I think mindset matters more than many tactical people like to admit. This is where Morgan Housel's contribution is so valuable. He reminds people that money is not only arithmetic, it is expectation, comparison, identity, and story. A lot of financial misery is not caused purely by the numbers on paper. It is caused by the distance between what someone has and what they think a good life is supposed to look like. That gap is often inflated by comparison, by culture, by social media, by status games, by inherited scripts, and by the strange modern disease of treating money as a scoreboard for your worth. That is one of the fastest ways to ruin whatever money you do have. Because if money becomes a scoreboard, there is no finish line. Someone always has more. Someone always appears freer, safer, richer, better dressed, more traveled, more invested, more successful, more optimal. If your internal standard for enough is simply more than what I have now, and preferably not less than what other people display, then money will never calm you. It will remain a forever moving target. That is why I tell people to define enough much earlier than they think they need to. Enough is one of the most protective concepts in finance. Enough does not mean no ambition. It means the ambition is attached to a life, not an endless comparison loop. Enough might mean bills paid on time. It might mean no revolving credit card debt. It might mean an emergency fund that lets you sleep. It might mean contributions to retirement beginning. It might mean one guilt-free family outing a month without panic. It might mean enough savings to leave a bad job. It might mean enough runway to say no to one abusive situation. Those are not trivial definitions. They are powerful, because once money is tied to peace, options, time, and dignity, it becomes a tool again instead of a mirror. I much prefer tools to mirrors. Mirrors make people self-conscious. Tools make people capable. That is the psychological pivot I want for everyone listening to a conversation like this. Stop asking money to prove your worth. Ask it to support your life. That is a much more merciful and intelligent use of the same dollars. This is also why I do not like the phrase good with money when people use it as a permanent personality label. Nobody is born opening a spreadsheet and feeling spiritual peace. People learn, they make mistakes, they avoid things, they improve, they regress, they get clarity, they automate, they simplify, they recover. The whole point is that money is a set of behaviors and systems, not a fixed moral identity. Once you see that, shame begins to lose some of its grip. And when shame loses its grip, action becomes easier. That matters, because action is what changes things, not wishing, not vaguely promising to be better, not hoping next month feels different. Action lists the expenses. Classify the buckets. Cancel what is stealing money without earning its place. Automate savings. Automate investing. Choose one small amount if that is all you can do. Review the system monthly, not daily, not obsessively. Monthly is enough. That is another lesson worth keeping. Most people do not need to think about money every day. In fact, for the anxious daily checking often makes things worse. I would rather have one concentrated hour a month of deliberate review than 30 scattered days of ambient guilt. A monthly review says I am in charge of this system, but I do not need to worship it or fear it in every waking hour. That is a healthier relationship. Open the accounts, check the 4 buckets, see what changed. Correct one thing. That is plenty. The financial life is not healed through one giant revelation. It is usually healed through repeated small acts of clarity. Over time, those small acts become momentum, and momentum is what most people are really missing. They do not need a miracle. They need evidence that the machine is finally moving in the right direction. Once that evidence appears, hope returns, not fantasy, hope. The kind built on proof, a debt balance declining, a savings account rising, an investment transfer happening without being asked, a subscription canceled, a spending category brought under control, a fixed cost lowered, an expectation redefined, a family discussing money without panic for the first time in years. These are not flashy things. They are transformational things. This is why I say the best financial advice you will ever receive is not some genius trick. It is this. Look at the money, put it into a few meaningful buckets, automate the important moves before life can interrupt them, and define enough before comparison teaches you to chase forever. Do those 4 things and you will already be ahead of most people, not because you became rich overnight, but because you stopped drifting. You stopped living at the effect of a machine designed by everyone except you. You started building one that serves your own life instead. That is the real shift, not richer first, clearer first. Then steadier, then stronger, then wealthier. If you stay with it long, I trust that process because I have seen it work in too many lives to treat it as theory. The person buried in shame is not helped by complexity. The person living paycheck to paycheck is not helped by lectures about million-dollar retirement balances if he cannot first see where Tuesday's money went. The person who thinks they are hopeless with money is not helped by being made to feel morally smaller than they already feel. What helps is a framework. A framework gives shape to chaos. Shape gives confidence. Confidence makes repetition possible. Repetition is what builds wealth. So yes, I think these 4 rules can change a life. Not because they are dramatic, because they remove drama from the part of life where drama is most expensive. And that is one of the wisest exchanges you can ever make.